Hello everybody, wanted to come on here and talk a little bit about some of the games I've been playing over the past month. I am, as of today, which is now Wednesday afternoon, still waiting for my deluxe edition of Final Fantasy VII Remake to come. I pre-ordered it through Amazon. I knew it was going to be delayed, but 1 week later it's supposed to be coming Thursday or Friday this week, so either tomorrow or Friday. I can wait a week, not a big deal. So I've been playing over the past month some shorter games, trying to play some things that maybe on a free Saturday I can play most of, if not the entire thing. So I've been able to play a couple of games here, and one that I'm hoping to finish up tonight before Final Fantasy VII comes, because I have a few hours left, I think. So I've been playing a few games lately. The first one is the Zone of the Enders Second Runner, the PlayStation 4 edition. I played this originally on PlayStation 2, including the original as well, and I also have the collection on the 360, the HD collection, so I've played it before, and I just hadn't had time to sit down and play this version of the game. I got it a while ago. I do want to check out the VR. I haven't checked that out yet. I don't have a VR headset yet, so I didn't check out that mode. Otherwise, I played everything on there, the extra missions and things like that, and it's amazing. I really think this is the best mech-based action game ever. It really is. There's so many that are done really well, and the first Zone of the Enders is great by itself, but for me, just the gameplay is stellar. It is so smooth and fluid, and there's enough complexity with all the different weapons that you can get and different strategies you can use that it's never boring, and the environments are fantastic. The soundtrack, I mean, visually, it's done. Everything's done so well that it's just an amazing action game. One where I really want a third one. I would love to see a third Zone of the Enders. This game is just spectacular, and this is my favorite version now. After playing it, everything about it just felt a little bit nicer. It looked just a little bit nicer, not by a lot. It was always just these tiny little enhancements after playing the PS2, 360, and PS4 versions. There were just little things about it that I overall like this one the best. And I do like also the incorporation of using the sound in the actual controller for when Jehuti talks to you when you're in the cockpit. It comes out of the controller, and then other sounds will come out of the speakers, and that really just added another layer of immersion that was really good, that wasn't in other editions. And then of course there's, you can play the VR mode, which I haven't checked out. I'll check that out someday when I get a PlayStation VR, but I really love that. It's my new favorite version of that game, having played 3 different versions of it. The next is a game that I am so mixed on, because it's like 2 different experiences. You take the first maybe roughly 2 hours, and I love this game. It was such a refreshing, wonderful experience. And then you get past those 2 hours, and I didn't really like it, to the point where eventually I kind of hated it. So it's such a mixed experience, and one that I'm keeping though in the collection because of how much I really like the first part. I'll actually probably replay at some point the first maybe hour to 2 hours of this game. I probably will, because I liked it that much, and I was just so disappointed that as it went along it just got worse and worse and worse. That is The Girl and the Robot. We got the deluxe edition quite a while ago with the soundtrack, and we both wanted to check it out and just haven't had time to yet. And it's a very short game, well under the 10-hour mark, so I was able to play that in a day. And I love the way this game looks. There's something just very fairy tale about the way it's done, and the atmosphere, and the way music is used very sparingly, but when it is used, it really adds to the overall feeling of the game. It's done so well. I like the idea of it. I love the relationship of the girl and the robot, just done through the visual ways in which they interact, and in which they interact with the world, and how they solve puzzles together. I just, speaking of really just the first 3 hours of the game, I love the way the puzzles were designed. Combat was not frequent, but there was enough of it to where it added a bit of tension, but it wasn't too much. And the combat was a little clunky, but didn't really matter because it wasn't heavily featured in the first couple hours. It was enough that it was exciting and something to really add some spice to the mix of just doing puzzles, and add a little bit of, again, more tension, but it wasn't too much where it took away from it, and it didn't really matter that it wasn't quite precise. Sometimes the button commands were a little delayed. It really didn't matter because there wasn't a lot of it. But I love the way they utilized the two different characters and switching back and forth between them to solve different puzzles. It worked really well. I just really loved everything about the first 3 hours of this game. I was in love with the experience. It was fantastic. And then things just went downhill. As I said before, one of the drawbacks to the game is that the combat feels a little bit unresponsive, and it's a little slow moving and switching between maneuvers, and it isn't perfect. But the first few hours it didn't really matter because there weren't a ton of enemies. Usually it was 1 to maybe 4, and sometimes you could use the puzzles to actually defeat them instead of straight combat. So it worked fairly well. It was fine. And then you get to a point where there's this maze, which has dozens upon dozens of enemies. There's swarms of them, including ones that have a purplish kind of aura that will charge at you and explode, and there's just so many of them. And it was manageable eventually, but it was difficult only because the combat was not perfect. That the issues with combat and actually implementing that became very apparent and added an artificial difficulty that made it very frustrating and not enjoyable. And it really, that whole section of the game, there were puzzle elements, but they were more annoying rather than interesting, it was a huge change, a very abrupt change after the first big boss fight, where you really use their two abilities to solve the boss fight, with trying to fight against another robot and then switching back to the girl to shoot the witch with the cannon, the sorceress with the cannon, and going back and forth. Really great utilization of both of their abilities and switching back and forth. And then you hit that point, the combat becomes almost the main focus for a little while, and it's awful. It is very difficult to get through at that point, just because things aren't working well, and it kind of loses a lot of its magic, and it really just doesn't get better. It's really sad. It's really something that started off great. I love the way it started off, and it just plummeted for me. I really wish that the creativity with the puzzles had continued throughout the rest of the game, and that it continued to be more the focus, more this kind of fairy tale feature with no real dialogue. There's no real voices. It's more just through body language and things. I love the atmosphere that it created, but what ruined it was the sudden change into combat being almost the focus, and the combat just being poorly implemented. So that kind of ruined it. But I still like having it because I do like the soundtrack, and again, I probably will replay just those first hour to 2 hours tops, depending how fast you're moving, because I liked it that much, which made it all the more frustrating that I hated the rest of the game. It just, big disappointment. It's one where I'd like to see that concept redone. I'd love to see this remade by maybe a more competent studio, more seasoned team. I know this was for the team that created this. This was fairly early. It might even been their first game. But not going to happen. But I would love to see that because I really like the idea and what they were trying to do in the beginning. The last one here that I'm just about through, played quite a bit of it. Another one that's just a fantastic experience. I picked up on a whim. I had heard good things, but I just wasn't certain if I was going to enjoy it or not. But I loved it because we found it really cheap. Dragon Quest Heroes, the World Trees Woe, and the Blight Below. And there's also Dragon Quest Heroes 2 on PS4, which I will be getting after playing this. This is great. I absolutely love this. I'm not a huge fan of the straight Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors, all those different series, but I do like a lot of the themed ones because they add a little bit of something, and this added so much more than I've ever played before. Before this, my favorite ones were definitely the Gundam themed ones. I enjoyed those, but this blew it out of the water because the RPG elements in here were fantastic, to where outside of the actual exploration and combat, which was a straight Dynasty Warriors style type game, it felt like a slightly watered down Dragon Quest game. It really did. And the way the story played out, it felt like a very typical by the numbers Dragon Quest game, but it felt like a Dragon Quest game, and it felt like it had enough interesting character interactions and dialogue, and there's enough meat there to where it's like, okay, this is kind of a short Dragon Quest game, fun enough to where it stands on as being just like an okay little RPG. And then you add in the difference with the Dynasty Warriors type combat with Tecmo Koei, and it's amazing. I mean, just absolutely fantastic. It is so much fun. It's very addictive. The missions are so well played out. All of the different creatures, they are all recognizable creatures from Dragon Quest, and they're done really well. They all feel like they paid attention to the abilities and the level of difficulty the different creatures represent from the turn-based RPGs, and putting them in this style of game. It really seems to have translated well, and they did such a good job making every one of the characters that you get, the original characters to this game and the characters from other Dragon Quest games that you encounter, they all feel unique. None of them feel like just, oh, here's one sword wielder, here's another sword wielder, it's the same. The only exception being obviously the two main characters, because they're very similar and almost exactly the same in how they control, because in the beginning you choose which one you're controlling. It changes a few story elements a bit, but aside from them, every other character feels very unique and is fun to use. I didn't think there was a single character that I didn't enjoy using, even though I had favorites. And I loved being able to switch between them, and the leveling system was well done, gaining new abilities and adding things to all the characters. There was just so much here that was fun, and it was very addictive. I love doing all the side quests and just revisiting places and refighting bosses and things through side quests, because it was genuinely fun, and there was a good deal of strategy. It was the mindless hack and slash only goes so far. You have to add something, and there's a different strategy to how you utilize your team, and you can only have a certain number of characters on your team at once, so you kind of have to think, who do I like best, how do I like making these characters work off each other, and you kind of pick your dream team out of all the characters by the way you like to play, and it really lends itself to find your play style, find your team, and go for it. And then there's another element of strategy with being able to get tokens from defeating creatures and then summoning them to fight for you, or have a certain effect like raising tension, or just kind of whacking a bunch of enemies in front of you. There's a way of strategizing and using those, and it works well with levels, especially where you have gates opening and closing, and different you have to protect a central structure or a character, and different ways of enemies are coming from different directions, and you can kind of strategize a bit with some of the tokens that you get and the monsters that you summon to guard certain areas as you're running around, and it works really well. I thought it was fantastic. It was very well done. It looks beautiful, plays perfectly. It's more than what I would expect from a game like this. It was everything that I would want and beyond. So this is a fantastic game, and not the type of game. These type of games I usually don't do everything in them, because they kind of get repetitive after a while. They kind of the excitement runs dry after maybe 10-15 hours, depending on what it is. Some of the older Dynasty Warriors I've played maybe like 4 or 5 hours and was done. But this has been holding my interest, and I'm going to do just about everything in it. And I'm grabbing the sequel probably next Black Friday. I guarantee I'll be able to find it really cheap then too. So a great game, and I recommend it. If you are a fan of Dragon Quest games, check it out, even though it's very different from the turn-based RPGs or anything else like that. Check it out, you'll like it. And if you're not a fan of Dragon Quest, even if you're not, obviously there's going to be some things with the character interactions that you won't know, but they have such vibrant and interesting characters and great dynamics between some of them that it almost doesn't matter. You really don't have to have played Dragon Quest games. So even if you're not, you're just kind of a fan of JRPGs or the Akira Toriyama art style, or you're a fan of more fantasy-themed Dynasty Warriors type games, if you're a fan of any of that stuff and you're kind of curious about it, check it out. Even if you have never played a Dragon Quest game, I think it's worth it, because there's so much more depth in the combat and RPG elements into this, and there's a lot of that. Akira Toriyama Dragon Quest charm translates perfectly into this. Amazing. They've been doing such a good job with these. I really hope someday they do a Xenoblade one. That'd be amazing. But I do think even more, even though I would love that more than anything, I think the number one thing they have to do is the Tales series, because just the way combat is done in Tales games in general, it lends itself perfectly to this. You have a ridiculous number of characters that already are just very interesting, have great dynamics, and there's a wealth of story to use, because the countless numbers of skits and conversations in those games, there's so much you could do. And Tales have had a ton of crossover games on the PSP, and they kind of made their own version of this on the PSP that I've never played before. It's Japan only, but I heard it's just kind of okay, not that great, but you really need this kind of translation, I'd love to see that on like PS4 or PS5 down the road or whatever. Tales would be amazing. They would probably be my number one choice, and then a personal favorite choice of mine would be Xenoblade. But I really think that I am starting to get into a lot of these Dynasty Warriors style games themed after different franchises, whether it's anime or video games or whatever. But yeah, I hope they keep making these because they are fantastic. And I will, of course, be back on here either tomorrow or Friday, whenever my Amazon package shows up, to show you the deluxe edition of Final Fantasy VII, even though you've probably seen it 100 times or more on YouTube, because everyone seems to be getting that, and some people got it early, getting it like a week late. But and then eventually, once I beat it, I'll be talking about my experience with it. I've been trying to avoid any reviews or anything for spoilers, and spoilers for a game that old that I've played, I don't know, 12 times. The remake of a game I played 12 times, but it's supposed to be different enough. It's supposed to be almost a reimagining more than a remake. And obviously it's only the Midgar section of the game. We'll see what they did there, because they made that section a 30-40 hour game by itself. So I'm very, very curious and excited. So I will be back with an unboxing for that, and then eventually a review when I finish up with that, and hopefully it is as good of an experience as I think it's going to be after that demo, which really sold me on the game.